in today's episode of Rob Konrad Conversations. Charity Lee.
February 4th, 2007 was the day she died. So yes, February 4th, it'll be 12 years. In a way, I was self-medicating with drinking, and, the doctors kept me supplied with plenty of Xanax. And I cried non-stop. It felt like for a year and a half.
It is a mother's worst nightmare.
My son, who was 13 years old at the time, murdered his sister. He beat her and choked her and ultimately stabbed her 17 times and then called 911 and turned himself in.
But it turned out to be an even bigger tragedy.
He wanted to kill somebody, and he wanted to hurt me. I knew, Mama, if I killed you, you would suffer for about 15 or 20 minutes, but if I let you live, you would suffer for the rest of your life.
A story of trauma, healing, acceptance, and forgiveness.
Forgiveness is very nuanced. Letting go of the anger and the rage. I never stopped loving him. And at the end of the day, always make your decisions based on love.
Join the conversation now.
Welcome to Rob Konrad Conversations. Conversations with extraordinary people that motivate and inspire, learn, grow, and impact lives. Subscribe now and hit the bell icon for a new conversation every week.
Here comes the sunshine and burns away clouds like they never were.
Hey and welcome, this is Rob Konrad from Switzerland. There are tragedies in life that seem so overwhelming and so impossible and so unlikely and so cruel that makes you wonder how anyone affected could ever possibly recover. And yet there are some amazing and extraordinary people who not only do recover, but somehow manage to find forgiveness and love and become stronger and manage to become happy again. And today's guest is such an extraordinary person because her story is one of incredible tragedy, but it's also a story of and an inspiration for exactly this kind of strength and hope. In February of 2007, Charity Lee's 4-year-old daughter, Ella, was murdered. Not only murdered, but murdered by her own brother, Charity's 13-year-old son, Paris. Charity is here with me today, and we'll talk about how she was able to find hope and happiness in the 11 years since this has happened, how she found forgiveness and love, and how the Ella Foundation that she started in the name of her daughter is helping victims of trauma and violent crimes and mental illnesses. So I want to thank you for taking the time, and thank you for sharing the story, Charity Lee.
Good to be here. Thank you. I'm being attacked by a cat right now. Hold on. Okay. It's good to be here.
So, Charity, next February it will be 12 years since Ella passed away. So how are you today?
Today I'm okay. February 4th, 2007 was the day she died. So yes, February 4th, it'll be 12 years. I think about it. I have started to think about it, but I don't really dwell on it till about a month before the event. One of the ways that I have found to cope with this kind of tragedy and trauma is to try to be as present in the moment I have in front of me. Mm-hmm. It's taken a long time to be able to do that, but it does help. And now, as opposed to the past say the first, I don't know, it took a good 6 or 7 years to not be completely overwhelmed on anniversaries. But for the past 4 or 5 years, it's like the dynamic has shifted. Instead of the anniversaries owning me or taking over me, I've kind of taken over the anniversaries, and I try to do something to honor Ella on those days.
So what is it that you do in those days?
Different rituals, I guess, for different anniversaries, because in my mind, the two big ones are always the day she was born and the day that she died. So on the anniversary of the day she died, which is the one coming up, and I do this for her birthday also, the mental process I go through is this. It's just a different timeline. For some reason, usually around 24 hours before the anniversary, whether it be death or birthday, I start thinking, like, I'll look at the clock. And it's like I start to do a mental countdown, like, well, this time 12 years ago, like, especially like on the day that she died, we were doing this. And this time 12 years ago, according to what my son tells me, is about the time that he decided to kill her. And then when it gets to the time that, we know that Ella died, that's when the majority of the pain comes in on that day. But then on her birthday, I stop and I think, oh, this is the time that I went into labor. And oh, this is the time that I just wanted somebody to shoot me because it hurt so bad. And this is the time that I saw her for the first time. And so it's kind of the opposite process, but they're both, sad and overwhelming. So on her death day, what I used to do when we were still living in Texas, when I was still living in Texas, was, in the Hispanic culture, they have Dia de los Muertos, which is in November. But what they do is, they build altars and they light candles and they set out food as a way to, because they believe on that day their loved ones come back and, they have a day on earth and they can commune with them. So on her death date, that's what I would do. I would build her an altar and light her candles. I still have the candle from her memorial service. I light it, one day a year on that birthday, and I try to honor her memory that way. Now, more recently, in the past 3 or 4 years, I will normally try to roll out a new program through the foundation on her anniversary days, whether it be a death day. I'll try to, not always, but try to have a new program ready to debut. This year, I think we're going to try to have a new program ready. I'm working on a couple, but we'll just have to see how it goes. And then also, now that I have a 5-year-old, well, he doesn't participate in the death day rituals. He usually goes with his grandmother on those days. But he definitely participates in the birthday rituals. Because on the birthdays, I still have her a cake made that says happy birthday, Ella, whatever age she would be. I write her a letter. Imagine, like, I would be saying to her at that particular age this year. She would be, 17? I'm sure I would be telling her to stay out of trouble. Please stay out of trouble. So, you develop your rituals. to deal with the trauma, or one should develop rituals. Rituals help keep us sane.
Mhm.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I see.
Yeah.
So maybe for those who are not familiar with the backstory or the story that the tragedy that has happened in 2007, could you explain your own words what happened on that day?
Yeah. So, I mean, in a nutshell, on February 4th, 2007, I had gone to work, and I had a babysitter who was at home with my children, and she left early. And my son, who was 13 years old at the time, murdered his sister. He beat her and choked her and ultimately stabbed her 17 times, and then called 911 and turned himself in.
Okay. And what was the reason that he did that?
The reason he gave then, or the reason we know now? Or both?
Both, I guess.
Yeah, the reason he gave at the time, like immediately at the time on the 911 call, is he said that he essentially had a psychotic break and was hallucinating and thought that she was being attacked by some sort of demon, and that was, he was trying to save her, and then at some point he realized that it was Ella, but that all turned out to be a lie, and it was quite different than that. Now what we know is that, in a nutshell, he wanted to kill somebody, and he wanted to hurt me. His original plan was to murder us both,
Mm-hmm.
but he told me later that he realized after killing his sister that it was much harder than he thought it would be to murder somebody, not mentally or emotionally, but physically harder to murder somebody than he realized. And since he and I were about the same size at that time, since he was just 13, he was worried that he wouldn't be able to kill me and he would be the one who was hurt. So he realized at some point, and this is all from conversations that Paris and I have had. I'm not like putting words into his mouth. This is things he's told me. He realized at some point that if he let me live, he told me basically, he was like, I knew, Mama, if I killed you, you would suffer for about 15 or 20 minutes. But if I let you live, you would suffer for the rest of your life.
And why did he want to make you suffer?
That's a really good question. Paris, I mean, there were things that I had done as a mother. You know, when I was a teenager, I had drug addiction issues and had been sober for 12 years. 11 and a half years or so. Well, let me tell you, I hadn't had any problems with addiction for 11 and a half years. But when he was about 11 and a half years old, maybe 12 years old, I relapsed for a 6-month period of time. And he was justifiably, very angry about that. He, had a really good mom for 11 and a half years. And then all of a sudden, he had this mom who, it was quite traumatic for him, I'm sure. But, he has since admitted that he had his first homicidal thought around the age of 8 years old. which is, around the time his sister was born. But I don't think we really understand enough about people like Paris to know why they want people to suffer, other than it seems to be their preference. And, he thought that he had issues with me, or he did have issues with me, because and I have some reasons, but even when you have a reason like that, you're still just like, but why? Why did it have to be this way? Why did it have to be your sister? Especially 12 years later, looking back on it, I know a lot more about his mental state of mind, his emotional limitations, but unless we think that way, there's only so far I can go in explaining it before I too get to why. Why?
So Paris has been diagnosed in the meanwhile with schizophrenia?
No.
Or
He has no diagnosis of schizophrenia. The general consensus, he has not been formally diagnosed as an adult, because we started to have testing done when he was an adolescent, but he shut the testing down when the results started coming back showing that he has all the characteristics of someone with a diagnosis of anti-personality disorder and narcissistic personality disorder. In layman's terms, and Paris and I both, we agree on this, don't necessarily like the term, because when you say it, it makes people think it narrows down what people think about him. But in layman's terms, he is a sociopath.
A sociopath, okay.
Mm-hmm.
You're still in touch with Paris on a regular basis, right?
Mm-hmm.
And what I found most surprising when I first heard about the story was that you've forgiven your son and you love your son.
Very much.
So for something as terrible as this to happen, it seems surprising that you can say you still love your son, because he, obviously what he did was the most terrible thing that he could do to you, and he did so intentionally. So it wasn't in a fit of drug-induced rage or something. He planned to do it, and he did so intentionally. So did it take long for you to love him, or did you stop loving him at some point when this happened, or was it just a motherly love that just continued? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, I never stopped loving him. Now, was that difficult some days? Yes, it was very difficult, very many days, and it still is sometimes. He is not an easy person to deal with.
In what way?
Well, he's a sociopath, and he's a narcissist. So, I mean, even just dealing with a narcissist and a narcissist alone is very difficult, because everything's about them, me, And then he has these, sociopathic tendencies on top of it. And I mean, there are days, and there have been months at times, where I'm like, you know what, kiddo, I love you, but I'm taking a break. I need some space mentally to deal with you, or to build up the strength again to deal with you, especially when he was younger after he had committed the murder. But I didn't ever stop loving him, no matter how much rage, and there was a lot of rage. He was always my son first. And when Paris was born, I made him a promise that I would love him no matter what, and that I would always do the best I could to be the best mom I could to him. Now, obviously I wasn't able to always keep that second part of the promise because I did relapse. And parents do make mistakes, and they don't always do what's best for their child. Even, a parent of an average kid may. When it came to the loving part, I grew up feeling that the love my parent had for me was very conditional.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was determined that my child was not going to grow up with that feeling. And so when he murdered his sister, I thought about all the times that I screwed up as a kid. And I mean, in some of my screw ups, obviously I never killed anybody, but I came pretty close to killing myself more than once. And, I thought about how much I needed didn't necessarily agree with me, but I knew it had my back. So that's what I wanted to be for Paris.
Okay. Sorry, I just lost you there for a second. The connection dropped a bit.
Okay.
After you talk about the unconditional love that you want to give him, could you repeat what you last said?
Yeah, I didn't really feel like I got that growing up. So I became determined that that's what I was going to give my child.
Mm-hmm.
I made a promise to him. And I mean, for me, people ask me all the time, like, how did you do it? How do you do it? And I kind of am like, well, how do you not? That's my baby. I carried him in my body. I, was there with him for 13 years. Even when I relapsed, I was still struggling to be a mother, And it's just like, how could you not? As a parent, the way that I think about parenting is you don't have a baby and say, well, I'm going to love you as long as you do A, B, C. But if you do this, that's it. I'm just turning off that love. That's just not how it worked for me. And I mean, the love that I have for my children, all three of my children, it's very fierce and it goes very, very deep. And, there was also the fact that, like, I am his mother. And yes, I was his victim also. But he was still my child. He was still my baby, my firstborn, deeply loved him and felt connected to him, still do. And I was the adult. I was his mother, and he was 13 years old. He was still a child. He needed a mother. He needed a parent. Now, I had to deal with the rage. I certainly had rage. But I tried to, as best I could, not take it out on him. Now, that doesn't mean that he didn't know how angry I was or he didn't know my feelings on the matter. I've always been a very honest and blunt person with my children and the people in my life. But it meant not, taking it out on him in an inappropriate way. I have a story I always tell. There was one time I went to go visit Paris, and this was before he was sentenced. The investigation was still ongoing. you know, we were still learning things about the fact that what he did was intentional. Like it wasn't like things were getting any better, things were getting worse. And in the room next to us was a girl. She was maybe 15 or 16 years old, and she had gotten a visit from her father, and he was just, I mean, he was yelling at her, and he was calling her all these horrible names that I would never call my child, and just talking to her like she was a piece of trash. And all she had done, not that it's okay, but all she had done was skip school and smoke some pot. And I mean, he was yelling so loud, he was like interrupting our visit, you know, and I finally just couldn't take it anymore. And I was like, I got up and I walked over there to their little visitation room. And I was like, would you please just shut up and quit talking to your daughter that way? She skipped school and smoked some pot. Big deal. Does she need, like, you know, like, big deal. I'm like, I'm trying to have a visit with my child. And I like went and I sat back down, and I remember thinking like, and how am I not yelling at Paris like this? Because I certainly have every right to do so. Like even at like, why am I not doing that? But I think I lost you. There we go. But it just didn't feel right.
Yep, there we go.
Okay.
And what did Paris give any explanation in the beginning, or did he just back up from what happened? How was the first time?
Paris, to be honest, Paris was a little asshole for a good 4 or 5 years after the murder, maybe even longer. He didn't really start to mellow out in his treatment towards me till he was about, I don't know, I guess 19. And what it took was me reaching the point finally where I was like, you know what? I was like, you're not a child anymore, when he was about 18. And I was like, and until you know, I was like, you can even fake it, you know, like until you, like I established some much clearer boundaries because he was not a child anymore, and he kind of kept stepping over those boundaries, and so I just didn't talk to him for a year.
Okay.
And after that, I think he was like, he got a deeper appreciation of, oh, like this is what having my mom does for me. Because again, he's a narcissist, so it all comes back to, you know, what it does for him. But after that, he started to kind of mellow out. But when he first was arrested, he was cruel. It was like all of a sudden, he was like a completely different person. I mean, people have a hard time believing me, I think, sometimes, but Paris was a great kid. I mean, he was loving and affectionate with me. He was very helpful with his sister. I mean, we had arguments and things like that. He was still my child. And then things were rough, and he was angry, definitely, during the time that I relapsed. but there was nothing major that, you know, somebody could look at and be like, oh, like that's what happened. But afterwards, it was like he was a completely different person. In fact, he told me one time, I guess it was 4 or 5 months after the murder, and I mean, I was a wreck. Like, I was a wreck. I was severely traumatized and trying still to navigate the, you know, criminal justice system that I really knew nothing about at the time, and you know, figure out like what happened to my son so I can get him help. Like, how do I fix him, you know? And grieving Ella, you know, it was like there was 2 parts of my brain, one part that had to figure out who Paris is and how to deal with him and how to help him, and then this other side of me that was just completely overwhelmed with grief. But I was also grieving Paris too, even though he was still here, because I was grieving the child that I had. Mm-hmm. This one, I didn't even know who it was. There was a time about 4 or 5 months after the murder where I went to go see him, and I can't remember what had happened. Something had happened that day. I found out something or other. I was always finding out new stuff. And I couldn't stop crying. Mm-hmm. I mean, I couldn't stop crying. And, you know, I think I asked him something like, you know, Paris, just what the hell? Like, how did this happen? Like, you've got to give me something, because I'm like, I need something to hold on to. And he just kind of looked at me, and no empathy or compassion or pain on his face for the fact that, like, his mother was literally crying on the table. And he just looked at me and he had this grin on his face, and he was like, you know, he goes, y'all are just all so fucking stupid. And I was like, what? And he was like, y'all have all just been so fucking stupid. And he was like, all this time, you thought I was intelligent and handsome and charming and artistic and creative and helpful. He was like, you're all so fucking stupid. He was like, none of you saw the real me. Mm-hmm. And I remember just looking at him and being like, no. Like, the way that I see it is, you're the stupid one now, because you are all of those things, but you chose to throw all of that away. Mm-hmm. Right? And become whatever this is. So he was quite cruel for quite a while, and he only got worse as time went on.
Did he ever apologize for what he did?
Oh, not really. I mean, when he was younger, every now and then he would be like, Mom, I'm sorry. Like, you know, like he had eaten the last of the potato chips and left the bag in the closet or something. But he is not capable of a sincere apology because he's not sorry. And I mean, we have very blunt conversations now about the fact that he just doesn't feel empathy. He told me the other day, we were talking about, you know, who he is. And he was like, Mom, he was like, you know, I know that when I think about what I did to Ella, I'm supposed to like open this drawer somewhere inside of me, and there's empathy and guilt. And he was like, but when I open that drawer, it's just empty. It's just not there. Mm-hmm. I'm like, yeah, I know. I mean, I've come to accept that about him.
I mean, I'm sure you've asked yourself the questions a million times, but was there anything ever that, in hindsight, could have foreshadowed what would happen?
Okay, so this is what I tell people all the time. There are little things that happened, but even if you add them all together, you still wouldn't come to the conclusion that this is who he is now. And at the time that they happened, it's very, at the time they happen, it's not one of those things that would make you go, oh, warning, warning, warning. Mm-hmm. Like some of it can be explained away by, oh, well, you know, that's what kids do. Or when he got a little bit older, you know, oh, well, you know, he's a teenager now and he's trying to figure out who he is. And so the two that I'm thinking of are when he was little, maybe 3 or 4 years old. My mother had a farm in North Carolina up in the mountains, and the house had, it was kind of built into the side of a mountain. And so the porch of the house was really high off the ground, probably a good 25 or 30 feet. Mm-hmm. And it was raining really hard one day. And whenever it would rain really hard there in, you know, a particular time of the year, frogs would just come out from everywhere. Mm-hmm. Frogs. It looked like the plague. And I walked outside on the porch, and Paris had a bucket. Mm-hmm. Paris had a bucket full of frogs. And he was 3, 4 years old. Mm-hmm. He was taking the frogs one by one and throwing them over the rail mm-hmm. to the concrete driveway below. And, you know, the frogs were dying. Mm-hmm. And I was like, Paris, whoa, what are you doing, you know? And he was like, well, I just like the sound that they make when they hit the bottom. And I'm like, okay, no, honey. Like, we need to talk about this. Like, you know, those are frogs. They can feel things. Hurts and it's killing them. And he was like, oh, okay. And, you know, was it cruel? Yes. Have I seen other children do cruel things to animals when they're that age? Yes.
Yeah, I just want to say that's something that probably a lot of kids do because they just don't know better. I mean, it's not that like he was intentionally torturing them with sticks and poking their eyes out to make them suffer. Just like something like they made a nice sound, like kids throw eggs over, you know, all around the kitchen because it sounds nice like that.
Yeah, I mean, it's just one of those moments that you have. I mean, I remember doing things when I was 3 or 4 years old, like, you know, pouring salt on a slug to see, you know, what happens to it. That's now as an adult, I'm like, oh my gosh, that's horrible. That had to hurt so bad. But when you're young, you don't know. And, you know, whatever misgivings I had or whatever, you know, emotional reaction that engendered in me at the moment was put to rest because there were a couple of frogs that had not died instantly. And then I had to tell my son, you know, Paris, you know, this is one of the reasons why, you know, we shouldn't be doing this because look, like this one is still alive and it's in pain and it's hurting. And now we have to put it out of its misery. We can't let it continue to live in pain like this. Mm-hmm. And Paris was like, I can't do that, Mama. Mm-hmm. Like, I mean, he could not. And so I had to, you know, put the frog out of its misery. And then when he was older, there was an incident where I discovered that he had been wearing some of my undergarments. Now, in our household, it has always been like we have no problem with people who are gay or lesbian or transgender or transvestite. It's like, people, as my 5-year-old Phoenix says, I do me and you do you. That's kind of our mentality, So I didn't have a problem with the fact that he had been experimenting. I had often wondered when he was growing up if Paris might be gay or bisexual. And so when I discovered my undergarments in his room, we just sat down and we had a talk about it. Why are these in here? And, do you have questions? Because he was 13. Like, do you have questions? And, is there anything that you want to ask me? Or, and we decided together, because he told me that the reason he had them is because he wondered what it was like to be female.
Mm-hmm.
And more specifically, he wondered what it was like to be me. Well, I didn't really have a good answer to that because it wasn't an issue that I had never dealt with. I've always been fine with being a girl. I feel like one inside and out. So we agreed together to have him go talk to a counselor, and I made sure he knew that it wasn't because I thought there was anything wrong with what he was doing. It was just that I felt like, it was something that because I didn't know much about it, and that because he was a 13-year-old boy, he might feel more comfortable working through it with somebody who, understood it better. Because, I don't care how close you are to your child. I'm sure it's hard for a 13-year-old boy to be talking to his mother about any kind of sex.
Mm-hmm.
So he agreed that, he would like to have somebody else besides me to talk to it, with the door open all the time that he could still talk to me. But he murdered Ella the day before his appointment. So.
Okay.
And now we know that there are some sexual and sexuality issues that are part of Paris's current mindset. We know that now. Didn't know it at the time.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I think I lost you there.
After he killed his sister.
Yeah, now you're back. Now you're back. Yeah. So the day before it happened, was there anything unusual? Was there anything that you say change in behavior or?
Yeah, the weekend that it all happened, he was being very difficult to deal with. He was, I had to work most of that weekend. And he snuck out of the house one night to go down to the local skateboard park. And he, I didn't know about it. The babysitter didn't tell me. This was the night before he, and the next day when Ella told me that, Paris had gotten in trouble for sneaking out. And then that day that he actually killed her, he was very angry with me because, he had been, there was consequences for his behavior. And he also was angry because Paris was given an allowance at the beginning of every month. Mm-hmm. Just, he, and the reasoning behind giving it to him all up front at the beginning of the month was so he could also learn how to budget and manage money. Well, he had gone to the mall that weekend with the babysitter and Ella, and he had spent all of his money at one time.
Mhm.
And he was mad at me because I had told him, no, that's not the point of getting an allowance like this. You have to make it last all month long. And so what I had told him was, you need to pick one or two things that you would like to keep now, and the rest we're taking back.
Mhm.
So you can get your money back.
Mhm.
And, learn how to budget yourself. Well, he was really angry about that. And I remember, when I left home that day to go to work, he would barely talk to me. And I also remember that the very last thing I said to my son when I left was I gave him a big hug, which he did not return, and a kiss, which he did not return. And I remember telling him, Paris, I love you, and we've gone through hard times before, and we've gotten through them, and so we're going to get through this too.
Mhm.
And then that was, the last I saw him before I saw him at the police station the next day.
But none of this sounds unusual. I mean, 13 years old playing with their sexuality in one way or the other, or being mad for being grounded or whatever. It's what 13-year-old worries. I mean, that's nothing unusual. So there was really nothing. And it seems so strange that it's almost like you're talking about two different kind of persons. So like the person before, the person after, like those would be two completely different people. And I mean, I've seen your documentary, and there are snippets in there where Paris playing with the daughter and seemed like a perfectly normal child, not like a grumpy recluse or something. So it's really yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Really
Yeah.
difficult to-
Yeah, but Paris is a very smart child and now grown man. And I mean, you have to remember that in like those home movies you saw where he's playing with Ella, he was already having homicidal thoughts, At the age of 8 or 9, he fantasized about decapitating me
Mhm.
because he had gone on PlayStation restriction. And
Mhm.
so he had, worked out this fantasy where he was just going to decapitate me while I slept. And then he and Ella would get to do whatever they wanted all weekend. And then he was just going to call his grandmother when it was time to go to school. And, evidently I'm going to be in the bed decapitated this whole time.
Mhm.
So he was already thinking homicidal thoughts, but kids aren't dumb. People are always like, oh, well, how kids are so innocent, and kids are smart. Kids know that you don't go around, saying to adults, hey, I'm thinking about decapitating you, because then the adults are going to be like, oh, whoa, okay. Like, well, hopefully the adults are going to be like, oh, we need to, address this issue. So, I mean, for people, that have a hard time believing, like, well, if he was thinking that, he would have been acting this way. Well, no.
Oh,
Some people do act out, but not all of them.
yeah. Okay. I think I lost you there for a second. Yeah. So, I mean, there's nothing that seems like, yeah, and unusual when you hear about it. So, when all of this happened, I mean, how did you cope? How did you cope, and how did you heal? I mean, the first time, first moments must have been like a bad dream that never happens. But how did you cope over time and heal over time? What was the process?
Well, in my own way, I became a lot like Paris in the fact that it was like I was living for different people. On the one hand, I'm trying to think what's like the best way to describe it, because even to me, I still have moments where I'm like, how did I do all that? On the one hand, you know, I was falling apart. I lost 35 pounds in 2 weeks. I was so traumatized, you know, that I think I was in shock for like actual shock for quite a while. I couldn't speak without stuttering. I mean, I cried non-stop. It felt like for a year and a half. I used to go to the grocery store, just, you know, and, you know, just tears running down my face because everything I would see would trigger it. You know, kids with their parents, kids arguing with their parents, kids anywhere, just, you know, triggered everything. I was, especially after Paris was sentenced and, you know, was sent away, you know, I was self-medicating with drinking and, you know, the doctors kept me supplied with plenty of Xanax and sleeping pills. But at the same time, I was doing everything I could to still be a parent and mother my child and dealing with lawyers. I mean, I was being investigated also by the, you know, child welfare authorities and the police. And I mean, I hadn't committed any crime, but I was being investigated. And so I had all of that. But I think really what it comes down to, you know, I have a book coming out soon, hopefully soon. And I've been, you know, working on it. And, you know, it has to do with those early days after Ella died and, you know, kind of what led up to the creation of the foundation. And the theme that I'm noticing as I'm going back and looking at my own writings and stuff from the time is the way that I dealt with it was I didn't try to stop myself from feeling any of it. Like I really had a choice. But, you know, instead of running away from it, I dove into it. Mm-hmm. Like if I'm going to be angry, you know, who cares what everybody thinks? I have a right to be angry. Or if I need to cry all day long, cry all day long. Who cares what people think when you're at the grocery store crying on their apples, you know? Like dive into it. But when it comes time to make decisions at the end of the day or when it's, you know, decision time, make all of those decisions and base all of your actions on the fact, you know, base it on the love you feel, not the anger, not the rage. And I think that's what kept me going, staying focused on the fact that I loved my children. Because I also, you know, a lot of people are like, well, you know, you don't speak for Ella, or where is Ella's voice? And I don't think those people understand that the way that I speak for Ella and the way that I've always spoken for Ella is to not become like Paris, to focus on the love, because I made a promise to Ella the night that she died. When I'm real big about keeping promises to my kids. I think that's why I make them, because I know once I say I promise, I'm going to do everything I can to actually keep that promise. But I promised her that I would make her, that I promised her I wasn't going to let her die for nothing. Mm-hmm. That I would make something meaningful come out of this. And I think that people who say that I shouldn't still love Paris, or I shouldn't have forgiven him, or I don't speak for Ella, I don't think they understand that the way that I've handled all of this has been for Ella and because of Ella. Because if Ella had grown up up the kind of person I would have wanted her to be. Somebody who's loving and compassionate and forgiving and tries to help people. I mean, so I stayed focused on that. I guess in a lot of it, I've had my promises to keep me going. I've had promises that I've had to keep. So even when I didn't want to, you go back to your promise.
In the first time, we talked about this when we had our first conversation, there was no help from anyone externally. So you didn't receive any help from social workers. You didn't receive any help from police, from the system, let's put it this way.
Mm-mm.
And so this is something your organization tries to offer support for victims of violence and crime.
No, hold on, I think
yeah, now you're back.
Yeah, so my organization does try to offer help to all people involved. I received help from certain individuals in as much as they were able to help me through a situation like this. I mean, it's not a very common situation. I looked up the statistics on it one time, and according to the, Federal Bureau of Investigations here, there's about, and it's remained pretty much at this number over the years, about 35 cases a year of siblings killing siblings. And of those cases, under the age of 18, and of those cases, the number of siblings who intentionally kill another sibling are like one. I think maybe Paris was the one in 2007. I mean, it's not common. So most people aren't even, the individuals helped as much as they were able to, but the systems in place, they were horrible. I mean, like I just said, I was investigated by the police. I was investigated by the child welfare services. They wanted to press charges against me for child neglect.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So there was no help there. So what I do through the foundation is try to give people who are going through trauma or dealing with incarceration that kind of support without judgment.
So how does the support look like in practice?
Well, it looks like different things for different people. I mean, sometimes support means just listening to a mother, whose child has been murdered, or listening to a mother whose child is sitting in prison, or starting support groups for whole groups of people who have experienced that kind of thing to get together and talk to one another. Or support has meant in the past that I've made visits to death row for mothers who aren't able to go see their children as often as they would like. And, you don't want to leave somebody sitting there on death row alone for months at a time without a visit from a kind face. Or, teaching classes. I've taught tons of classes to women who are dealing with addiction issues and trying to get their children back. I mean, it's been 12 years. The foundation, or I have done through the foundation so many things, it's hard to name them all. We've had, groups for children whose parents are incarcerated where they get to write their own story, kind of rewrite their own story. It was called the I Have a Voice program. they would come in and we would talk about like a particular topic on that day. Like, if, you know, how does it feel when you go see your parent in prison? Like, you know, and they would get to tell you their experience of their story, and then they write it down, and then at the end of it, you know, we put together a book, and they got to tell their own story, take back their story, express themselves, sometimes for the first time, about how it all was affecting them. I've became a certified crisis interventionist, and I used to ride with the San Antonio Police Department officers out on patrol and offer crisis intervention services at crime scenes. And, you know, I do speaking where I go and I tell my story, and, you know, open up for people, ask me whatever questions they want to ask. I think I just lost you again for a second. Right now we're doing a program in town called Let's Talk, and they are community discussions. You know, we have events that are open to the community, and there various topics are discussed. So right now we're doing Let's Talk mental health, mental illness. We've done one on family trauma. We've done, the next one we're doing is on childhood trauma. And then we're doing one on mental illness and people of color, mental illness and faith, mental population, do all kinds of stuff.
Okay. One of the things I'm sure many people are wondering is if something like that would happen to me, I would not have the strength to cope with this. I'm sure that's something that many people think. You know, if a situation like this happens to you, you kind of pulled through and became who you are now. But I'm sure a lot of people think, okay, I couldn't do this. So what do you tell these people? Is it something that you can learn? Is there a process of you know, coping with situations like this that you can learn? Is there certain steps that you can go through that help people, or what's your experience?
Yeah, I mean, you know, I just, a couple of months ago, or actually last month, I went to Texas and I gave a talk. I actually gave the talk to the agency that had my child incarcerated for 6 years in the juvenile justice system.
Okay.
And they asked me to talk about like how to build family resiliency. And so I talked a lot about resiliency, because that's what it comes down to, is resiliency. You know, are you resilient? And people think that you're either resilient or you're not. People are, I mean, because people do say that to me, like, oh, I could never deal with what you deal with. And I'm like, you know, resiliency is not a superpower. It's not like, you know, I'm some sort of genetic mutant that has super resiliency. It's something that can be learned. It can be taught. It can be learned. And even if you don't think you have it, you probably do. Because usually what I tell people, I'm like, well, you're sitting here talking to me, aren't you? And I'm sure your life has not been perfect. You know, a lot of times I'll get people in a crowd I'll just say to them, okay, I want you just to take a minute. We're going to take a minute, and you definitely don't have to call any of this stuff out. But I want you all to stop, and I want you to bring to mind the worst thing that has ever happened to you. And, you know, you can see everybody, most people, they like, you know, do the little eye thing, and you know they have something in their head. And then I'll ask them some questions like, now, how many people know that this happened to you? And you know, you see them thinking some more. And I'm like, how do you think it would be different if you had told people or you told somebody now, you know? And then we just start working through steps, like the way you survive these things. It's hard, but it's not rocket science.
Okay.
You have to have a will to live, which most of us, in fact, I would say all of us, even those that commit suicide, have the will to live. It's just, it goes against every instinct we have to not want to continue living. And then most of us have something that motivates us to keep doing that other than the will to live. People continue to struggle with their mental health for many reasons. And a lot of those reasons are because, you know, I have children, or I have people that love me, or I have people that I wouldn't want to hurt that I love, or, you know, I'm not going to let that son of a bitch get the best of me. I mean, that was part of it for me. You know, parents wanted to destroy me. And I was like, well, I'm not giving you that. Yep. So it's something that can be learned, how to survive trauma. And then once you learn how to survive it, then you can learn how to use it to thrive again, to recreate a life again, to have a life again. No strict and fast rule that says just because something terrible happens to you, you have to continue to feel like crap for your entire life.
Yeah. But so sharing the experience seems to be a very important part of the whole thing. I mean, I'm sure many people are afraid that when they share their experience, they might open themselves up to whatever form of criticism or aggression. And then something that I've also noticed when you look at videos about your story in a documentary or about your speeches, there are a lot of people that kind of leave mean comments and say, oh, she was a terrible mother and it's all her fault and she sort of should have seen that earlier, and there were warning signs. So whether or not, probably none of them know you, but there are all people always know better. Say it again, please.
They do.
Yeah.
Yeah. A lot of people think I just had like dealing with that kind of stuff. I mean, it's definitely a concern when it comes to opening yourself up. Even if you're not doing it on the level that I'm doing it, and you just go and you share it with somebody else. I mean, there's the concern of not being accepted or being judged, or somebody changing their entire perception of you. And those are all very valid concerns, because I mean, as you saw from what you saw when you were looking at my stuff, there are plenty of people in the world who will try to hurt you at your time of vulnerability.
Mm-hmm.
But I guess the way that I think about it, my view of it is, this too is part of learning resiliency. I mean, I have a friend who tells me that she's constantly amazed by the fact that after everything I've gone through in my life, that I can still be so naive. And I'm like, I'm not naive. I just choose now to focus on the positive. And every comment or person that tries to hurt me or hurt, the person that's opening up, has been an opportunity to learn that I don't have to let somebody else to define me and what happened to me. that it's my story. So that's an opportunity to learn confidence.
Mhm.
It's an opportunity to tell that person, well, look at how you're acting. That says more about you than it does about me. Like, I'm up here on the high road and you're like way down here in the gutter. And then to say, you know, I'd like to help you with that. Because usually the people that reach out to me and are so hateful, I'm like, if there's anything I can do to help you let go of your anger, you just let me know.
Mhm.
They don't like that either. But in my opinion, in my experience, for me personally and with the people that I work with, the first thing that has to be done, or maybe not the first thing, but it has to be done eventually to deal with trauma and anger and rage, is to put it out of you.
Mhm.
Like to put it into the light. I tell people that the only way to get rid of darkness is to bring it into the light.
So in what ways could this happen? So in what ways could you bring out what have happened to you? Like writing it down or talking to other people or what could be those ways?
I mean, it's different for everybody, you know. I've always been a in your face talker kind of person. I mean, even when I was younger and when I was a teenager and I had I was addicted to heroin and I had an issue with the whole, shooting up heroin and stuff. When I finally got sober, I mean, I was talking about it all the time.
Mhm.
To the point where my mother was like, do you have to go around telling everybody you used to be a junkie? And I'm like, yeah, because it's who I am. It helped make me who I am now. There's no shame. Like that's the first, I think that's part of it, putting down the shame associated with it all. But for different people, I mean, there's different ways that fit their way of being. Writing, telling a friend. My grandmother, when I was little, whenever I would get upset about something, she'd have me write something down on a piece of paper and then we'd set it on fire and let it go, and she's like, that's it. It's out of you now. Let it go. But there has to be some process of getting it out, and then once that happens, hopefully what happens, and this is kind of where the learning skills part comes into it. You don't just go tell anybody. Like, you have to decide who can you trust with this pain. And that's where, the more intellectual side comes down. Like, well, I obviously can't tell this person because they're probably going to do this. But maybe I could go talk to Bob over here. And then, hopefully you find that once you start letting it out to people that can be trusted, even if it's a complete stranger, right? Sometimes strangers can help you more than people close to you. That they help you to carry that weight. And then you start to realize, okay, well, I've got people helping me. The weight isn't as heavy as it used to be. Because I can guarantee you, because I've worked with some families for a very long time, that I'm not going to say that time heals all wounds, because it doesn't. Some wounds are always going to be wounds. But I can guarantee you and promise you, if you start putting your pain out there, I think I just lost you. Start putting it out there, start sharing it somehow, that as time goes on and learning about, different ways to cope with trauma, as time goes on, your perspective on it will shift. And you will reach a point in life where you realize, oh my gosh, like I still have a life. And, it can be a better life. It doesn't have to be a worse life. My friend calls me naive, but I just say I'm an optimist.
Why naive? Why naive? In what way naive?
she just thinks I'm naive because, you know, still after everything that's happened to me in my life, that, you know, I still trust people and have faith that people are, you know, good. And, you know, I tell her that it's not so much being naive, that it's just been my experience, that I understand better now, having gone through so much myself, that everybody struggles.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And so, and I think people essentially are good. And so I think if you operate in the world in such a way that brings out that good in people, then, you know, you're going to get that good.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
It's something we talked about earlier in our first conversation was you also work with people who are, where it's hard to believe that they're good, like for one example, like child molesters, for example. So especially when you're parents, it's hard to see, hey, this is a good person because of what that person has been doing. Yet you said it's important to, in a way, accept these people and accept the good part of these people. So can you talk a little bit about that and you know, your experience from your work with your organization, foundation?
Yeah, so I think maybe let's clarify things a bit. I try not to look at people or even situations anymore as this is good, this is bad. I think those words are very judgment laden, you know, like you hear, oh, this person's good, and that's just kind of judgy. And then, oh, this person's bad. Well, that's a judgment too, right? And my work and in the way that I choose to go through life, I don't want to judge people. Mm-hmm. That's not really my place. I don't want people judging me. I hate when people judge me. I mean, and it works both ways. And people that are like, oh, she's an evil monster and she should never have bred. I get people telling me that. You know, I don't like those judgments. But then I also have a problem sometimes with all the people who are like, oh my God, you are amazing. You are like this, you know, wonderful human being. Because then I'm like, yeah, I've got bad, you know, like, you know, I'm human. And so I try not to, even though I just, you know, used them, try to move away from the good and bad. What I do is I try to see the humanness in everybody, right? And all human beings are capable of terrible acts. Mm-hmm. We may not believe it, or we may not want to admit to it, but all human beings are capable of terrible things, whether it be because of a mental disorder or something going on in the environment that lends, you know, that tends to make a human being, you know, just do terrible things. So I try, when I'm interacting with some of our clients, to see past what they did and instead see who they are, the full spectrum of who they are. And so, like when you and I had talked before, and, you know, I gave you the example of working with on a personal level, it was difficult for me emotionally because I had experienced childhood sexual abuse. And I know what their victims, or I can imagine what their victims may have felt as a consequence of being victimized by this person. But my job is not to judge, and my job is not to sit there and think about me at that moment. I'm there for them. And so what I had to do in that particular situation is focus on the admit that there are commonalities. People want to be like, I don't have anything in common with basketball.
Could you repeat the last sentence? I think I lost you there for a moment again.
Oh, yeah. Well, I think the first thing that, that I have to do in working with clients that I'm, that are pedophiles is admit that, yes, there are commonalities because we're both human. There are areas in our lives that I could probably find where we can meet on common ground. So, for instance, I know what it feels like because of my experience of being Paris's mother and getting all that hate mail and this terrible comments on social media. I know what it feels like to be hated because of who you are. Mm-hmm. Right? And I know what it feels like because of my early years as an addict and then my relapse to want something that I know I should not have and that I know is not good for me and those around me. I mean, it's not the same as, molesting a child, but if I take out the behavior and instead focus on the emotional and psychological side of something, I can put myself in anybody's shoes, and that allows me to help them without focusing on the behavior so much. And I think, and I try to teach people how to do this because empathy also is something that can be learned. Most people are empathetic. Most people are not wired like Paris and completely, for the most part, unable to experience it. Most people are capable of it, but because of their learning, their value systems, the environment they grew up in, just the things that they learned from the environment, either deaden that empathy or dull it or cover it up. But people can learn to be more empathetic.
Yeah, we were talking about working with people who, let's put this one, might not apparently deserve attention, and how to deal with those people, right, in your work. So, what kind of support is it that you're offering these people?
Well, let me back up a second. See, I guess the reason that I'm able to do what I do is because you just asked. You just made the statement, and I'm not calling you out, but you just made the statement like you work with people that a lot of people would think don't deserve the attention.
Exactly.
My mindset is that all people deserve the attention. I mean, I can't give it to everybody, but all people need, and in my view, deserve at least one person who will give them that attention. And then my mindset is also, if somebody doesn't, if we can't wrap our mind around the fact that a person who has just done something horrible, that's when they need the attention the most. If they had some attention maybe beforehand, and I know a lot of people are going to say, well, your child did something horrible. And maybe he did need more attention. I'm not sure. But if we cannot wrap our head around the fact that after somebody has done something horrible is when they most need the attention, then horrible things are going to keep happening. Because this is the time where it's definitely should seem obvious that somebody needs the attention, whether they are the perpetrator or the victim of something traumatic. I can think of no better time for there to be attention for so many reasons, to learn from them, to support them so they don't go even further down a path. Because it's something, I mean, somebody might have done something horrible, but they can always do something more horrible.
Mm-hmm.
The depths of depravity go deep.
Absolutely. I mean, I'm being intentionally black and white now, but one could say, look, there's this child molester who did horrible things, or there's this someone who murdered some people for no obvious reason, and they're locked up now. So why don't we forget about them? Why care about them after what they did to society? Let's put it this way.
For the state of your own soul.
Mm-hmm.
See, this is what I don't understand is people will sit and they'll be like, that person is horrible, they're callous, they're cold, they're uncaring, lock them up and let them rot in prison. And I'm like, now you're being cold and callous and uncaring. Like, you are becoming what you say you hate.
Mm-hmm.
And so, if for nothing else, the state of your own mind and your own soul, give back something different.
Mm-hmm.
Because, you know, if you want to live in a world where there is kindness and unconditional love, and that's what you have to give. I mean, unless you're going to leave it up to everybody else to create that world. And then if that's the case, you can't sit around and complain if that's not the world you live in, because you haven't done anything to try to help make that world. Mm-hmm. But yeah, to me, that's just always like, and it's not even a question of emotion. It's a question of logic. Like, did you not hear what you just said? You said that person. Okay, I'll tell you a really good story to like get into a metaphor. My 5-year-old all the time is like, you like metaphors too much, Mom. But when Paris, you know, my oldest was little, he was 4 or 5 years old. We lived in Atlanta, and we lived in these like apartments that the family owned, and it was in a part of town where it was like, they call it Midtown Atlanta. So it wasn't quite downtown, but still a very, you know, urban, well-populated area. Mm-hmm. And it was on the corner of a very busy intersection. And then catty corner to the apartments was like this shopping area where a grocery store was. Mm-hmm. Well, Paris and I had stopped there after I picked him up from school to get some things at the grocery store, and traffic was horrible. I mean, horrible. I sat in this parking lot for a good 20 minutes trying to get out of the parking lot just to get on the road where I could tell I was going to take me another 15 or 20 minutes to get to my house that I could see. I was getting very frustrated. Well, it was finally my turn to like pull into the line of cars that was actually going to go out onto the road the next time the light turned green. Mm-hmm. And this woman in another car cut me off and like took my turn from me. So I knew I was going to have to sit there another 5 minutes waiting for a chance to get on the road. And I just started cussing and being like, oh my God, I can't believe that woman just cut me off and blah, blah, blah. And I remember saying, she is being such a bitch. And Paris, who's very young, he looks at me and he was like, in the back, he's like, why are you getting so mad? He was always a very logical child. Why are you getting so mad? And I said, she's being a total, bitch. And Paris looks at me and he goes, you mean just like you are right now? And I was like, yes, you're right. I was like, I don't like talking to you. But I mean, and children do this quite a bit. He completely called me out on the fact that I'm sitting here yelling at this woman for being irritating and frustrating. But that was exactly how I was acting. So what I try to do in the work that I do is create the world that I wished we all lived in. And some friends of mine call that naive. I call it hopeful. Because I really do think if we put it out there, hopefully people will begin to mirror it. Have you ever read any of the research on the fact that people actually have genes in their body up here in the front of their brain, especially called mirror genes?
No, I've not heard of that.
Oh, okay. It's fascinating research. So and next time you sit down and you have an in-person conversation with somebody, there's a really simple experiment and you can see it at work. So next time you're talking to somebody face to face, pay attention to what you're doing. So if you are talking and then, like, say within a minute or so, the person you're talking with will probably pick up their hand and do something like that. Or say, I sit up right now. Then at some point, not long after I sit up, not now that we're talking about it probably, but you're going to subconsciously sit up yourself. Or yawning, one person yawns, everybody starts to yawn. So scientists started to look into this, and it turns out that we actually have an area in the front of our brain that causes us to mirror one another. And, they hypothesize that the reason for this is because we're social beings, and so we're also narcissistic beings. That social connection, we start to mirror one another to make us think on some subconscious level that, we're alike, therefore we're connected, therefore we're going to bond and create this community and this group. So I just try to put forth actions and behaviors into the world that I hope other people will begin to mirror, because that's what we do. Yeah.
You said something in the interview which I really liked. It's you said we measure our society by how we treat the ones who harmed us.
Yeah.
And I really like that, because it says a lot about anyway, dignity that we have as a society and as a species. And I really like the statement.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not somebody else has said that before me. I mean, it's I can't claim ownership of that one, but I mean, I believe in the truth of it. If somebody somewhere doesn't stop the cycle, you can't always be going back and forth of, well, you hurt me, so I'm going to do this to you, and well, you did that to me, so when I get the chance, I'm going to, do this to you. You see it a lot like in power dynamics, where you'll have a group of people who have been oppressed, and then they justifiably are like, you can't oppress us anymore. We're going to, do something to change the system, and there's lots of different ways to change the system, but I'm sure you've heard the expression, the oppressors or the oppressed become the oppressors sometimes. I mean, that doesn't solve anything. You're just going back and forth. So there has to be a way, you know, and there's a lot of conversations about this when in regards to criminal justice and race relations and, you know, even differences among religious groups and stuff. There has to be a process where wrongs are acknowledged and then rights are created that are based on, you know, what's right for us as a society, and answering hatred with hatred, all you get is hatred, you know. Answering you know, violence with violence, well, all you're gonna have is violence. It doesn't necessarily make it better. So I just think that, but you know, a lot of times people were like, well, you just want to let people get away. No, there has to be accountability, you know. Accountability is the first step in acknowledging that wrongs have been done. I mean, I have never said that I don't believe my child should have lost his freedom. He is a dangerous person, and he should not be walking around in the world at this particular point in his life. And he did take something. I mean, he took something extremely precious. He took Ella's life away from her. There has to be an accounting for that. But what I have a problem with is how he has been removed from the world, because he does still have things that he could offer to society. I mean, his intelligence is being entirely underutilized. He is a very intelligent person, and there are things that he could do, even, you know, removed from society, that could benefit
like
society.
what?
Oh my gosh, let's see. Right now they have Paris like making leather belts and stuff. Who's to say that, you know, Paris's mind couldn't be put to work analyzing research, or, you know, hell, even developing, maybe, you know, trying to work with psychologists and medical doctors and who are doing the research into people like Paris, and being like, let them, you know, talk to people and be like, well, if there was anything that, you know, what motivates you? What would make you, you know, want to change? Like, don't just sit him in there and throw away the key. He could do useful things.
I see.
Have you ever looked into the Norwegian prison system?
No, not at all.
Is it? Yeah, Norway. Norway has a much different mentality in their prison systems than America does. Now, granted, it's a much smaller country and they don't have as many people incarcerated. But do you remember the man, I don't remember how long it's been now, 5-6 years, and I can't say his name because I'm terrible with Norwegian names, but the Anders...
Breivik, the guy who killed 80 children on the island.
Him. I mean, I don't know every single aspect of the case, but ultimately, you know, they came to the conclusion that he has a mental health disorder, and he does. Like, it was expressed with the lens that he showed it, that he used to show it, was based on, you know, the extremism, the anti-immigration, our race and culture is being degraded, and, you know, I mean, it was a nationalist rhetoric that showed his mental disorder, but they locked him up. I mean, he's definitely locked up, but he's also provided with, as is every person in the Norwegian prison system that has committed a violent crime, you know, psychological intervention, with the hope that with the support and the assistance that they will be able to show him, like, okay, listen, like, we know you feel strongly about these issues, but, you know, your brain also wasn't working quite right. And maybe help him, support him, and help him to change those ways of thinking. Now, he's not showing too much inclination to do that, I believe, because at this point, there are certain people that are resistant to that type of help.
Mhm.
But at least they're trying, you know? In America, we don't even try.
Yeah.
Just lock them up.
I know you're opponent of the death sentence, and many people would probably say, look, he's a perfect example. I mean, he killed 80 or something innocent children. Why not just now remove him from this planet and make sure he just never do this again, and you know, get rid of people like him? So what would you say to people who think along those lines?
Oh, lots of things. Well, if you murder him, because, you know, in America, when somebody is executed, that is what goes on their death certificate: homicide, because it's the unnatural killing of another human being.
Mm-hmm.
Murder does not justify murder. The example that I give is, you have small children, right? Say they go to school one day and one of your little girls, like, just hit somebody, just like hauled off and was like, I don't like you, and smack, smack, smack. And the teacher calls you and they're like, your little girl hit somebody, and you bring her home and you spank her. And while you're spanking her, you're like, you're not supposed to hit people. I mean, it does not make sense. We tell our children and each other that you're not supposed to kill people. The only time we ever tell people that it's okay to kill somebody else is if you're defending yourself, truly defending yourself against imminent death and harm. Then it's like you get a moral pass. And I get that. I mean, I'm all for self-defense, true self-defense. But to be like, you're not supposed to kill people and you killed somebody, and so we're going to kill you, it doesn't make sense. And every single one of those people that has been executed, they have families, they have mothers, they have other people that mourn them, hopefully. The majority of them do. So you're creating more victims. You're not doing justice. You're creating more victims of murder. In 2005, the United States Supreme Court ruled that children under the age of 18 are not eligible for the death penalty.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that was in 2005. Ella was murdered by Paris in 2007.
Mm-hmm.
If he had in 2004 or 2005, if it had been before the ruling came down, and he was eligible for the death penalty, and then he killed Ella, then how would that have helped me? It wouldn't have brought her back.
Mm-hmm.
And then I would have 2 dead children, and both of their death certificates would say homicide. And I'm pretty sure I would not be sitting here now if that had happened. Mm-hmm. So that would have brought about it's not just at all. Good. Yeah, it's no good. And then, I mean, the whole, you made the comment, prevent them from committing future acts. No one can read the future.
Mhm.
Or commit a future act. In fact, here in America, the research and statistics show that 98%, give or take, 96, let's just say 95 to 98% of people who commit homicide never commit another murder again. Now, that doesn't mean that they don't commit other criminal acts, but is that because they're criminal, or is it because they didn't have the intervention and support they needed after committing a criminal act?
So do you believe in second chances?
Yes.
What about Paris? I mean, when will he get out of prison?
If he's held the entire time, he will be released in 2047.
But he's eligible for parole at an earlier date, or?
He's eligible in 2027, but he won't get out when he's eligible. In the state of Texas, he's a capital offender because the person he killed was under the age of 6. Capital offenders spend typically 85% of their sentence incarcerated. And then if he's paroled out, he would be paroled out on a very highly supervised parole. So,
but would you give him another chance, so to speak, if he got out early?
I believe I have given Paris many chances, right, to be a different person. He has not taken any of those chances, and I don't think he is capable of taking those chances. So, this is what I usually tell people. If he was released today, based on my experience of him to date, I would not feel safe around my child. But I also would not go to the state and be like, don't you dare release him. I would go to the state and say, this has been my experience of my child. This is what I am afraid could happen. But ultimately, it's your decision to make. I say all the time, I am so glad I am not the one who has the power to make the decision about whether he stays or gets out, because I wouldn't know what to do. I personally have not seen anything in Paris that convinces me that he has changed, that he is capable of empathy, that he feels remorse. And because he lacks those qualities, I think it makes him dangerous. So I wouldn't want to be around him. And I certainly wouldn't want him around my 5-year-old. But I would, go ahead.
Is Paris writing letters to Phoenix?
He was. I put a stop to it.
Okay, but you stopped it. Okay.
Yeah, because he wasn't really writing letters to Phoenix. He was writing letters to me saying they were for Phoenix. And finally, I was just like, listen, just Phoenix is 5 years old. These letters that you're writing are obviously not meant for a 5-year-old. And, you're talking to me, so just talk to me. And then because I tell Paris and I tell Phoenix, I'm like, if Phoenix wants to have a relationship with you, that is a decision he will have to make himself when he is an adult. I'm not encouraging it, but what I tell Phoenix is, I love your brother. I do not trust your brother.
Mhm.
I don't expect you, I mean, I say this in 5-year-old terms, but I don't expect just because I do. They have no relationship.
Mhm.
And, you know, one day he'll have to make his own choice.
Um, you mentioned that you've forgiven Paris.
Mhm.
How do you forgive someone who did something like that? I mean, not in a specific case, but there can be anything where it's hard to forgive someone, whether it's been an accident, whether it's been someone caused harm intentionally. I mean, there are many cases where it almost feels impossible to forgive someone. How do you learn to forgive, and how do you kind of open your heart to someone who intentionally or unintentionally caused harm to you or makes it hard to forgive?
So I think the first thing that one has to do is that
Oh, say it again, please. Sorry,
forgiveness
the
is not
connection.
you forget.
Sorry, could you just
I mean, I think the first.
Mhm.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can hear you now. Yeah.
I think the first thing that people have to do is define what forgiveness is and what it isn't. I think that forgiveness, again, is one of those words like good, bad, sociopath, that, you know, we hear it and then this one image pops into our heads of what it is. And forgiveness is very nuanced.
Mhm.
It is not this black and white act that we do. So for me, what forgiveness means is letting go of the anger and the rage and seeing a person who harms you as just that, a person who has harmed you,
Mhm.
and try to which means you see them as human. Like, you know, people tell me all the time, Paris is a monster. No, he's not. He's a human being. And so for me, it was an act of letting go of the anger. And I did that and wanted to do that and was able to do that for many reasons and in many ways. I wanted to do that because in the long run, especially with Paris, because he doesn't care if I forgive him or not. You know, I don't think he even quite understands the concept because of his sociopathy and narcissism. But for me, it was getting to the point where I realized that I was harming myself
Mhm.
by holding on to so much anger. I don't know if you've ever heard this expression, but there is a expression that I've heard before, and they were like, not forgiving is like, you know, drinking a cup of poison and expecting the other person to die, right? Yeah. So as time went on, you know, I realized that all this rage that was justifiably consuming me was harming me. And I didn't want to walk around feeling like that for the rest of my life, because I'm pretty sure I couldn't have without destroying myself.
Mhm.
So that was a reason that I wanted to and needed to. And I tell people all the time, forgiveness is really a very selfish act. You're doing it for you,
Mhm.
right? It's people are like, oh, forgiveness, it's the epitome of Christianity or whatever, but it is selfish.
Mhm.
That's just what I believe. You do it for you because you want the chance of having a life not consumed by anger.
Mhm.
And then the way that I was able to do that, I mean, the fact that he's my son and I love him helps, because there's that to fall back on. And I'm very honest about the fact that if somebody else had murdered Ella, I may have walked down a completely different path. The fact that
One sense.
I might have just said, I hate them and run with it, But the fact that it was Paris, like, it's what made it so devastating, but it's also one of the things that motivated me to take the path I did, because he is my child. But what helped me to forgive and let go of the anger is I educated myself. I didn't accept the fact that he's a monster and he's evil. I tried to figure out, like, okay, he obviously isn't a monster, and I know he's not evil, but what is he? Who is he? And the more I learned about sociopaths and narcissists and the way they think and how that influences how they act, and just coming to grips with the fact that he is who he is as much as I am who I am, I am who I am, and just accepting him, right? I mean, it's like any relationship. You have to understand somebody, accept them for who they are, and then decide if you can be there with them how they are. To walk into it expecting to change them or convince them to be some other way, you're just set up for failure. So learning about Paris really helped to be able to forgive. But then the last thing about forgiveness that I always tell people, it's not like this one-time thing. I didn't wake up one day around 7 years ago or whatever and be like, oh, that's it.
No, forgive it.
I'm done processing it. You're forgiven and it's time to move on. No, I have to forgive Paris almost every day sometimes, depending on where his head is at, I mean, anniversaries. We started talking about anniversaries. Every anniversary day, I go through this whole process of forgiveness all over again. It all comes back, like the feelings and what he did and blah, blah, blah. So it's a process, especially if the person that you need to forgive is still in your life. But I don't know anybody that has suffered a trauma, whether it be childhood sexual abuse or domestic violence or the murder of a loved one, or even, people that have committed violent crimes or criminal acts and, they need to forgive themselves. It's not like a one-time thing. It's process. It's something that you must work at.
On your website, you wrote that Paris has taught you what love is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. In the dedication in my book that I write, it's dedicated to my 3 children, and it's dedicated, to Paris for showing me, teaching me what love is, and to Ella for showing me how love acts. and to Phoenix for, showing me that love really does conquer all. Yeah. And the reason, that I say that Paris taught me what love is because, it all, when I had Paris was the first time that I personally experienced, I loved my mother very much growing up. Still do love my mother very much. But like I said earlier, it always felt conditional on, her side. And so, when I was younger, maybe I experienced it as like a pure, powerful love. Maybe I can't recall too much. But with Paris, when I saw Paris for the very first time, I call it like the rapture. There was just like this moment where I saw Paris and like this whole new world opened up for me. And, I have certainly learned a lot through Paris, because of Paris, and in spite of Paris, about that world of love. And I say Ella taught me how love acts because, even in the short time that Ella was here, she was very much the lover, She used to tell me that, her little friends, whenever, like, we needed to adopt them because their mom wouldn't let them do something and they needed a nice mom, or, that she just was always the one who, she told my mom one time, because I was really upset with my mother, and, she told my mother that she knew that I was mad at my mother, but that Ella, loved her anyway. Ella was just, she was, she was a lover. And so a lot of times when I try to figure out, like, how to be in the world, I think about how Ella was in the short time she was here. I tell people all the time in my speeches, I'm like, we should all act more like 4-year-olds. Positive side of 4-year-olds. And I say Phoenix taught me that because, when I found out that I was having Phoenix, even though it had been 7-8 years since Ella died, and I had created this foundation and was doing all of these things to help other people, and, had pulled through myself relatively well, I think, there was still a part of me that was living with the dead, right? There was still a part of me that was not fully engaged in my own life. And when I found out that I was having Phoenix, and then when Phoenix was born, and then, 12 hours later, they whisked him off to the intensive care unit because he had this horrible heart problem. He is what it took for me to come back fully present in the moment. I like to tell people that until Phoenix, I lived with 1 foot in the land of the living and 1 foot in the land of the dead. Like I was straddling that grave, and there was still a possibility that I could have fallen into it, I guess, at any moment. But Phoenix took that possibility away. Like, I know. Phoenix really, like, you know how everybody around the world now is all about like mindfulness, living in the present. And a lot of people think like if you're going to be mindful, you have to have calm and quiet and, you know, but I don't think so. Phoenix is not calm and he's not quiet. But when I'm with Phoenix is when I experience the most mindfulness I've ever experienced, because I'm choosing to stay in that moment with him. Because I know now, after Parasanella, how amazing those moments are. And I also know that you don't know how many of them you're going to get.
Mhm.
So my crazy, difficult, opinionated 5-year-old is what keeps me grounded in the present, very mindful.
Mhm.
Yeah.
If people want to reach out to you, be it for help with your organization, or if they're interested in your work, or they want to book you as a speaker, how can they reach out to you?
Just Google my name. No. No, you can, we have a website, www.ella, www.ella, E-L-L-A, found, F-O-U-N-D.org.
Mhm.
And, or seriously, they can just Google Charity Lee and it's like all out there.
Mhm.
But the website's the best way. We're also on Facebook. I think we're on Twitter. Pretty sure we're on Twitter. Yeah, that's it. We don't do Instagram.
And if they need any help, if they had trauma, if they had any, if they're on either side of an act of violence, they can reach out to you, and then you can connect them to people who can help, or you can be of assistance to find them.
Yeah, what I want people to know is I am welcome to anybody at all reaching out to me. I get a lot of people though who, I don't know and they don't even live anywhere near where I could like actually meet with them. And, they want to know like, this is the terrible thing that happened to me. How do I deal with it? And, the only thing I can really do in situations like that is be like, well, here is what I suggest. Find someone to talk to that you trust, or find a good counselor, and I can help, helping people do that. But I'm not a counselor and I don't offer like online counseling. I try to, work with people locally, but globally just let people into my life so they can kind of learn about it themselves and take what they like and leave the rest. Maybe that's helpful. But it can help. Doesn't I'm going to probably get 100 to 150 emails a day. But everybody is more than welcome to reach out. Just don't expect that by sending me an email, all your problems are going to be solved. And then there's the movie. A lot of people have found that watching the movie is helpful, because what I get a lot of is, wow, like I don't, a lot of what I get is people will read my story or watch the movie and they'll give me like, I thought I had it bad, but damn. And I'm like, thanks.
Yeah.
And sometimes the movie can be helpful to people just to help them realize like they're not alone. There are people all around the world that are dealing with problems, and this is how it can be dealt with. For people that want to send me hate mail, you can just tell them, don't even bother. Save your breath. Go do something positive instead. Like, I've heard it all. You're not going to tell me anything that's going to make me be like, oh my God, nobody said that to me before. He's right. I am a loser. But what I can really suggest to people is just go and be what you want the world to be.
Mhm.
Start with yourself. Don't be ashamed of anything that has happened to you or anything you may have done. Show yourself a little self-love, a little compassion, and then give that back to the world. But if somebody is in crisis, the first thing they need to do is they need to either call 911 if you're in America, or reach out to somebody local who can immediately help you. Because I do get people that send me emails and they're like, I'm suicidal. And I'm like, I didn't even see this until now. I sent it 5 days ago. Like, we can't help with crisis care. So
Okay.
I think that's about it.
So I want to thank you for this conversation. It's been really, really great, and I want to thank you for sharing the also your emotions and giving people. I think the essence is that there is hope, even if the situation seems hopeless, and we all can find hope at the end of the tunnel. So I want to thank you for that. And there's always two questions that I ask people at the end of each conversation. And the first question is about extraordinary people who make a change in this world and who do good in this world and who are inspiring, like yourself. So who would you consider to be an extraordinary person?
Well, like I told you when we talked before, one of the main people that has inspired me when I first started doing all this work publicly is a man named Suja Graham.
Mm-hmm.
And he is a death row exoneree, and he inspired me early on to just be a revolutionary, to be confident in my own message, even though my message of, inclusivity, I guess, when it comes to how to treat victims and perpetrators, is not a widely practiced or accepted one. But he just inspired me and motivated me to just speak my mind as I felt it needed to be spoken. And his story is fascinating, just fascinating. It encompasses, being a death row exoneree, fighting for civil rights, the Black Power movement back in the day in prison. And I mean, he has a fascinating story. So I recommend Suja Graham.
Thank you. And the last question, and I want to close the conversation with that, is what's your message to the world? What's the message that's closest to your heart that you want to give to everyone who's watching this or to who's listening to this?
I guess what my message to the world has always been is experience, right?
Oh, sorry. No, the connection dropped. Sorry. The connection dropped.
Oh, okay. I guess my message has always been, own your story. Own your story. It's your voice. Use that voice. And at the end of the day, always make your decisions based on love. I mean, like you just said, mine, I think, is a story of hope in spite of the odds. and to just know that as long as you're breathing, there is definitely hope. Tragedy is not the end of the world. In fact, it can be so I guess that's my message.
Charity, thank you for the conversation. I really enjoyed it. And I will, of course, put a link to all of your to your website and to your foundation below this video for everyone to watch. So thank you for your time, and hope to talk to you again.
All right, thanks. And thanks for the hookup with Shannon.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for watching, and in a few seconds you'll hear about the extraordinary person that I'm going to talk to in my next conversation. But before that, I need to ask you for your help. See, finding people who inspire and motivate you to make a change, that's what's most important to me. But to connect you with these amazing people and to bring you conversations that you will not find anywhere else, I need you to become a part of our journey. So please get involved and leave a comment below with your own questions, and maybe even tell me who I should talk to next. And if you know anyone who might like this conversation, then please share it, because I'm sure that they will like it too, and it will help to grow this channel and to make an impact together. And by the way, on my website you will find all current and upcoming episodes, including show notes and transcripts, background info, books and websites of my guests, podcast links, and much more. And once you become an email subscriber, there is always some exclusive content, so don't forget to sign up, and I'll see you in the next conversation.
In the next episode, Rob talks to Dr. Rob Morrison. For 2 decades, he was the host of the much-loved TV program, The Curiosity Show. As one of the early pioneers of TV science shows, Dr. Morrison became an education icon in the 14 countries around the world where the show aired. He uncovered a world of scientific experiments that could be tried out at home, transformed science into something that was for everyone, and inspired a generation of kids to pursue scientific careers. Rob and Dr. Morrison will talk about how science education has changed in the past decades, the surprising reason why the successful show was stopped, how income disparity creates a 2-class education system, and much more. Join the conversation now.